and welcome to the Moonlight Game Devs Podcast, the podcast where game developers share the story behind their latest game. Today I chatted with Huw Millward. He's the developer of the text-based game Warsim. We had a chat about many interesting topics. One of the most interesting things I felt was the discussion about community building and how he used player feedback to continuously improve the quality of his product. What's up, Huw? Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Mark. Pleasure to be here.
You're the developer of Warsim, a text-based game. Can you tell us a little bit about Warsim and, kind of give us a description of what the gameplay is like?
Sure. So, it's quite a difficult game to sort of catalog because it's not really in any specific category. Like it is a sort of adventure-y game. It's kind of like a kingdom management thing, but there's so many different things that you can do in the game and so many different directions you can go in that it is quite hard to sort of pigeonhole into one sort of slot. But the general idea is that you're the sort of ruler of some weird fantasy kingdom, and you can sort of define the laws, you can interact with your people, you interact with a bunch of procedurally generated neighbors of all kinds of different fantasy races. I think there's 94 million possible ones that they can be, and there's a lot of different gameplay effects they have. So every game is quite different and random, and the world sort of changes around you. And the goal is, I guess, to just ride the wave of the chaotic world and try and build a decent kingdom and not be deposed. But you can do however you want.
So is it like the player is prompted with some decisions and they have to interact, or is it kind of like a strategy game? Kind of explain the interface sort of for someone who might be listening in the car and doesn't see the video that's playing right now.
So, basically, when you start a new game, you're sort of loaded in. You can choose your origin and stuff like that, and then you get this random world, and you're introduced with a sort of ceremony. And however you came about becoming the king, that sort of defines your entry to the world. So you could have maybe inherited the kingdom from someone who died of old age, or maybe you won a tournament to decide who'd be the next king, and so you get some bonuses relating to that. And then when you start the game, it's the gameplay loop is you get a sort of a main screen where there's a bunch of separate sort of sub screens, and then depending on what you do whatever you need to do there, and then end your turn and move on, and then the world sort of simulates, and then you're in the next year. And the things that you can do are things like recruiting troops and stuff like that. So that falls under recruiting troops, hiring and firing troops, training them, stuff like that. You've got staff. So there's different members of staff you have in your kingdom, like generals, spy masters, that sort of thing. And you can hire and fire these people as well, and they cost sort of money every year. And they have various traits and things. And if you don't have certain staff members, it means you can't do certain things. And they can sort of automate some parts of the gameplay for you if you don't want to do them. And then you've got the laws of the land. So you can sort of change laws. You can make laws where everyone has to wear a hat or something, or you can add taxes, remove them. You can visit your throne room and interact with various visitors that are procedurally generated. So you've got a lot of random people who come into your kingdom to talk about whatever's going on, tell you that someone stole a carrot from them, or that they, want to bring you some gold they found behind a tree. And then you've got exploration, upgrades and developments to the kingdom. There's a load of different things you can do, basically. And you can micromanage as much as you want, or you can just sort of get on with the main things. You can go after invading people and building up a strong army, or you can spend your whole time gambling and watching arena fights and watching fist fights and stuff in a pit. Or you can, pursue the diplomatic route and train up your diplomat and try and build relations with these strange foreign kingdoms that occupy the land. But you might be unlucky in the sort of random beginning of the game, and all of the kingdoms in your world might be savages who won't speak to you. So it varies a lot, but there's definitely a lot of stuff you can do in the game.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. I would love to dive a bit deeper into the development later on in the show, but for now, I just want to talk a little bit about you and I guess your background and kind of how you got around to making this game. How did you get started in game development, I guess, is my question here.
Yeah, sure. The game development thing, I don't think I ever thought it would be a thing I'd actually be legitimately doing. I was always just, hobbying and playing around with stuff. I think it started with like Flash and things like that, trying to make action script games back in the day for like Newgrounds, websites like that. But I was never any good at that at all. And then I started learning C++ probably about like 2011, 2012. And wasn't wasn't the best sort of C++ knowledge. It was mostly from YouTube and stuff. And I made a few test projects, and I couldn't even make them in a normal window. So everything was made in a command prompt window, and it was just like really basic programs and tools and like mini games and stuff. And one day I wanted to make a battle simulator. So it was going to be just like troops against troops just for a test. And I made it, and then I was like, I wonder if I can add an arena and some other things. And I spent like a couple of weeks adding all these little side features, and I left it at that. And I went on to work on another game for a couple of months, similarly in C++, in the command prompt. And it got much further. I spent 6 months working on it. And then I had a computer crash. And at the time, I didn't think to make any backups. And I lost the code to this like 6-month project, and it was devastating. And I was really bummed out about it. And that was like my proper real game project. So having lost that, I was like, okay, well, I'm going to go mess around with this old prototype, which was Warsim. And I was just working on it for a couple of months and adding more and more things to it. And it went from being like this really small little test simulation thing to having a semblance of like a reasonable game, but it was still missing quite a lot of stuff. And I put it on Reddit. I put it on a few other places, and it was free. It was on itch.io. And like over a small period of time, like a few people started commenting and stuff like that, but it wasn't too many people. And over I suppose like I guess it was like 2 or 3 years, like a small community gathered around it, and it started growing from there. And after a while, I started getting donations and stuff. And I was like, I think I could really do something with this, man. So I started working on the game way more often, and I was taking suggestions on from anyone and developing it further. And yeah, it just gradually became a thing. Ended up on Steam. I mean, I think it's almost at 20,000 sales now. I don't know if it's past that yet, but
wow,
it's not doing too bad. And it's a command prompt game in 2020. Do you know what I mean? So it is quite weird for me even that people wanted to play it, but it's not going too bad, man. We got 96% positive on Steam from 276 reviews, so we're getting there.
Man, that's super impressive. And I want to talk a little bit about who is playing this game and who is the kind of the community. Do you have like a certain player profile who enjoys this type of strategy game, or was it just something that kind of evolved and people just kind of started liking it? Like, talk us a little bit about that.
That's a good question about the demographic. It's a bit of a mystery to me, to be honest, because I haven't noticed any specific demographic. I get a few comments sometimes from people who played like really old DOS games from back in the day, and they're like, it's good to see that these are still going. And those sort of people are more willing to give it a chance because obviously they don't dismiss it on the ASCII graphics. But I've also had people that are like teenagers and stuff that are messaging me being like, I love this game. So I can't find a specific demographic. Maybe there are a few smaller demographics that enjoy it at the same time. I don't know. It's hard to really tell. But I mean, I haven't done Steam doesn't tell you the age group or whatever, obviously. So it's hard to break that down from certain things. And obviously like Reddit accounts and stuff, you can't really tell. But I would love to know myself. There probably is like a primary demographic. It's good. It's a good idea to know really that sort of stuff. So that's what you do with A/B testing, isn't it? With like adverts and stuff. If you were doing a game advert, you'd roll out a certain kind of ad aimed at a certain demographic, and if it was more successful, that demographic, you'd know that they were the one that is more interested in general.
Yeah,
that's a great question, man. That's a great question.
Yeah, I was personally very interested because I think, like you said, it's a really unique type of game. In that not a lot of these type of games come out these days because, well, people would probably assume that there would not be that much interest, but clearly there is something about your game that did captivate like a lot of people and made them really excited. So I want to talk a little bit about kind of the beginnings of your game. Like you said, you started out with just creating these kind of battle simulations. Like were these just like randomly generated numbers that were kind of being produced, or how did you go about designing those first systems, and how did they kind of evolve from there?
Oh, it was the most basic stuff, honestly. It was like preset numbers of like 300 skeletons against 300 goblins or something like that, and then they would have random strengths, and then it would roll like the strength numbers against each other and decide who killed who. And it was very basic. And I don't know. I think I just started. As you're developing, you learn other things, don't you? You pick up stuff, especially in your early development days. And I think I've learned so much in the time that I've been working on the game that I've come back and sort of reworked on the same stuff 2 or 3 times and redid it again and again with, the new knowledge. So it doesn't recognize, like, it's not anything like the game that I first made 4 years ago. And I would probably say that's more to do with other people than it is to do with me, because I've had so many suggestions. Like a player would play it and say, hey, this is really annoying, or I don't understand how this works, or it would really be better if this happened. And almost always they were right. So I tried to put as much of that in as possible, and it's made the game way better than I could have ever made it on my own, for sure.
What is the kind of player feedback that you're getting? Is it mainly based on content, or was most of the feedback kind of improving in bugs or things like that?
Oh, it's a big mix of both, man. Big mix of both. Like there are some people, like there's a couple of members of the community that I've actually counted how many bugs they've suggested that have been fixed. And there was one guy, I think it was like 500 bugs he found, and 500 like,
wow.
Yeah, like some of them really small, you know, like a typo or something like that. Some of them were like, they would go around and try and find any problem they could. These guys are heroes, man. Like, honestly. But there are so many people, like I think with some players, man, and I appreciate them, but like, because they were listened to, they want to help more. You know what I mean? They're happy to find more bugs and stuff. I remember one of the players was saying that normally if he found a bug in a game, he'd be annoyed about it. But he mentioned on the forum, it gets fixed on the same day. Do you know what I mean? Or within the same couple of days. So he feels good about it instead, getting credited for it and his name next to the bug fix and everything. So yeah, man, it's been immensely helpful. But I think it's mostly, I would say it's probably slightly more ideas than it is bug fixes that are mentioned by players. And man, when I went into game development, I thought that most people that would be suggesting ideas, when you see all these gigantic comment sections, you know, on Steam and stuff on a game when they're doing an update, you think, man, most of this stuff is probably going to be terrible. But I don't know if it's just the audience I have or what, but so many of the ideas are good. Like I barely ever see anything that I think that's a dumb idea. Like so many good ideas. Some of them are silly ideas, but they're not bad ideas. Do you know what I mean? Like, so like one guy suggested one time, he was like, I'd really love to be able to like have monsters as pets in my game because I want to be that kind of king. And someone was like, that's a stupid idea. And I was looking at that and I was like, that's actually quite a good idea. Like maybe you want to be an evil king, right? So I spent a week adding a system where you can build an upgrade to your kingdom, which is like multi-tiered. And you have these rooms or these like caves where you can keep monsters. And then there's like 28,000 randomly generated monsters that have their own graphics and move sets and stuff. And you can feed them like creatures and stuff. And you can feed them your own slaves and peasants and goblins that you've got imprisoned. And you can fight them against other monsters. And there's like people that come to your throne room and complain about it. And you can win prizes and stuff, and there's like 50 different opponents with like obviously their different randomly generated stuff, and you can hire a monster trainer, and if he's really he can randomly get eaten if he's really bad at doing the training, but he can get better over time. And it took me like a week to add, but honestly it's one of my favorite features.
Wow, yeah, awesome. I mean, I think you just mentioned so many great ways to kind of engage people in that early access stage. I think you're in early access right now, right? So yeah. People are constantly giving feedback, and I think it's so cool as well. So you mentioned that you put people who find bugs in the credits section as well.
Right. So basically, every time there's an update, if someone suggests an idea, I make sure their name is next to it, whatever their username is on Reddit or Steam or whatever. And then their name is next to that in the changelogs that go out to all the websites and Steam and all that. So some people get their name up in every update that I do.
Wow.
They're very consistent, but it's immensely helpful, man. I feel like they deserve every credit they get, like, because they're making the game better for everyone. Do you know what I mean? By finding those bugs or suggesting really great ideas. I don't know, man. It feels sometimes like a bit of the secret sauce to low-key game development is listening. Like if you've not got a lot of people on your team and you haven't got a bunch of people to do all the brainstorming, man, having people spit their ideas at you and stuff, sometimes they're really good, you know. Like, I don't know, if you've got the time to develop them, it gets a bit like feature creep where it makes the game development take so long. But I have I haven't been rushing to get the game out of early access, so I'm just happy to add all these things, and it's made the game better than it would have been if I just moved straight for the finish line, you know what I mean, and tried to get the game complete and release it and forget about it.
Honestly, that's incredible. I feel like you just shared so much interesting kind of tips on how to grow a game community, which I think we see it both the same way. That's really important because obviously you're generating fans that are not only just supporting your game through content and ideas and finding bugs, but also, you know, maybe supporting you in a future game as well.
Absolutely.
So I want to talk a little bit about kind of that decision process between deciding what feature from the community is going to make it into the game and what doesn't make it. Is it something that you just follow, you know, what feels right? Because obviously I'm assuming you can't put every idea in the game, or can you?
Well, so basically, when I first started, I honestly was so appreciative that anyone even cared about the game that I was happy to generally consider everything. So I still feel like to some degree I do that. But at the time, I made sure to note down every single idea that I didn't think was bad on a list. And after the first 2.5 years of developing the game, that list had 1,000 things on it.
Wow.
Yeah, it was huge, man. Like, and I would put some of if I was brainstorming one day and I had some ideas, I'd put some of them on as well myself. Like, but it just ballooned so big, and I still haven't cleared that today. Like years later, I've managed to get it down to about 200 things. So I do what I do now. I've decided to be a bit more vigilant about it because I want to try and get towards release sooner rather than later, and maybe add these things afterwards. So now I identify what stuff do I think would be really important for the game or would really make the finished game great. And those things stay on the list, and anything I think isn't very relevant or maybe has been already added into some capacity, I remove off. But yeah, I've tried to take every idea and add as many of them as I could. And I think in the development, I could easily say I've added more than 1,000 things probably that have been suggested.
Oh yeah, that's really incredible.
4 years, like that has been in early access, but that's the reason it's been in early access for so long, for sure.
Awesome. I want to talk a little bit about what kind of happens. I guess the back end of, I make a decision in your game, and I want to just kind of understand, like, what are all the kind of triggers that occur? Like, does every decision affect other factions, or like take us a little bit through, if you don't mind, of what is going on.
Absolutely. So I don't know, man. I don't like the idea of there being like stuff that doesn't have consequence necessarily. So I try to add consequence to as much as possible. I don't think there should just be like armies that come out of nowhere. Like they should be accounted for, like that they've been born somewhere. Do you know what I mean? Or like that there's a place that population has come from, and that you should be able to reduce it to nothing. Or the gold shouldn't come from nowhere, right? So there's always like a background for that sort of stuff. But I mean, there are different actions that sort of link in with each other, and there are things that connect them, and there are sort of areas that are sort of small and separate. So as you explore the world, you might find a village, and you can recruit people from the village, you can trade with the village, you could raid the villages, but maybe the village gets raided by someone else, or maybe your tribute from the village gets stolen by a bunch of orcs. Like, that can happen. But if you kill the orcs that are making that might be giving that village problem, that won't happen. They won't raid you. And if you destroy the village, then the orcs won't have anything to raid, so they won't get any extra gold. So things are sort of like interlinked in that way. But I think it's just a lot of like hundreds of different systems of gameplay that all sort of connect in some ways and others not. So there are definitely areas that are isolated from each other. But yeah, there's just loads of stuff, man. It's like a gigantic experiment of loads of different ideas, but it's been quite easy to implement them really in the text-based ASCII graphic sort of environment. So I have done a lot of experimenting with features and things.
Yeah. That's really interesting. I want to talk a little bit about, I guess, marketing. I mean, you've already shared that you're kind of involved a lot in community building.
Right.
Were there other avenues that you explored? I mean, apart from Reddit, is that kind of your main channel for raising exposure for the game?
Yeah. I mean, I love Reddit. I used Reddit for years prior to ever doing any game dev on it. So it's just the fact that it works as a community space, and I can use it for, browsing and doing whatever I normally do. It's just been perfect for me. But I do try, like when I first started with looking into like the marketing side of things, I just figured that the best idea would be to try everything, and see what worked, and try more, and keep on top of it, and just keep trying everything possible, and try and think outside the box. But it is a difficult thing because there's a lot of people trying to get everyone's attention, and there's not a lot of attention to give sometimes, for certain things. So you've got to just try and be in front of people. I've tried a lot of different things. I've tried YouTube and Twitch and stuff, and getting streamers to cover the game. I've tried the key distribution services, giveaways with certain groups, writing articles on Medium, the website, and then sharing those articles around.
What kind of articles did you write? Did you write about game development or something about your game?
So I tried to write something about my game that would sort of show it off and maybe draw people in. I'll try and find them now because I'm sure there was more than one.
We'll link them in the show notes as well for anyone interested.
Yeah, definitely, man. Definitely. I feel like a boomer, man, if it takes me too long to like pull up a link. Yeah, I wrote a couple of articles on Medium about a few different things. I wrote one sort of about how the race generation system in the game works, because I don't know, man. I really like procedural generation, and I think sometimes, like when you're a developer and you're working on a feature that's really cool mechanically, like you can get attached to it, and maybe to a player it's not as interesting because the numbers, they maybe won't see as much of that in the game or whatever. But I don't know. I really enjoyed that system, especially all the different procedural ones. So I wrote a few articles covering basically the race generation system and how it works in game, and they're outdated now because the system's bigger than it was at the time. But it wasn't too bad, man. It got a couple of thousand reads, and it did translate into definitely a nice boost in traffic and sales on the Steam page when that went out. So I've never had anything that's been like groundbreaking yet, aside from I think one or two YouTube videos and a Twitch stream that did really boost things up way beyond that average. But otherwise, you get sort of like bumps upwards that maybe like 4 or 5 times what you'd expect on a normal day. But it tends to die down not long afterwards. So it's a continual battle, I think, with marketing.
Yeah, just focusing kind of on a consistent growth, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not very good at it, man, because like I'll have like a period of time where I'm really focusing on the marketing elements, and I'm always trying to like write new articles and get some videos done and send emails out, and then I'll just like move back into like my development phase and like just hermit away working on updates and stuff and not really pay attention to marketing at all. But I think as long as it doesn't completely fall off into obscurity, like it's not too bad.
Yeah, I think that's one of the struggles, I think, of making a game alone, because there's such a big business and marketing component nowadays to game development.
Oh, 100%.
You really need to dedicate a lot of time to it to like you said, the game doesn't fade into obscurity.
Yeah, it's definitely part of the job, man, for sure. It's definitely like you can't do without it. I mean, some people try and palm it off by hiring, some outside group to market your game for you or whatever, but it has to be done one way or another, right? It's a vital thing.
Definitely. So I want to talk a little bit about procedural generation, which you touched on as well. So
love it.
To what extent is stuff procedurally generated? Is it just the kind of event system, or also some of the text as well? Like, can you talk us a little bit through how deep you went there? Because it seems like you're pretty passionate about it.
Oh man, there are so many different procedural generated systems in the game. So many. I mean, the names of the characters, the names of the kingdoms, the races and their effects, their skin colors, their cultures, their laws, their currencies, what the currencies look like, the different coin graphics, like these like unit graphics for some things, their faces. I think there's over 20 quadrillion faces, I think. For the characters in ASCII, they're all completely different. Obviously, that's realistically they're going to look the same once you see 100 of them. You've seen them all, right? Do you know what I mean? Like they're not groundbreaking, but I still always like, I do enjoy it. And sometimes, like as a game dev, like I was playing one time and I saw like, so orcs obviously are green, right? And I know this sounds silly, but I was playing one time and I wasn't really paying attention to this like test world I made. And I went to speak to the king of the orcs, and he had blue skin, and I was like, whoa. And then I was like, oh, it's blue orcs, right? It's basic.
Oh no, that's interesting. That's really interesting.
It caught me off guard, like, because I only designed them, and I've only ever seen those orcs in like green skin. So seeing like a big blue-faced orc with his, big ugly face, it caught me off guard. My own game, like I didn't expect that. And now, I mean, I've added like since that moment, I added loads of things that modify what they look like quite a lot. So there are some races where you'll find them with like really small faces that are generated like flattened if they're like pygmy orcs or pygmy dwarves, or you could get like a monstrous troll. So monstrous will make their face really long and loads of teeth and eyes and shit. And I don't know, man, you get some really interesting stuff.
Cool. That's so cool. I mean, that's really interesting. So I'm assuming that given how you just wanted to share the story behind like the orc that was adjusting its color based on a procedural event that happened, like is all the art completely generated, or is it something that you have some presets there that you're just manipulating, or how does that work?
So a lot of there's quite a lot of ASCII art in the game. Faces, flags, and some like troop graphics and crowns and stuff are like fully procedure generated, and then everything else mostly is pre-drawn. But the faces come from a system where it slots different lines of ASCII on top of each other. So you've got like a hair part, ears and eyes, a nose piece, a mouth piece, and a lower mouth, chin, neck, and all that sort of stuff. And they just sort of roughly line up with each other. And it sort of works because you make them all to be following the same sort of prototype, and then the game will randomly pick one of each part and slap them together. And what you get is, if you've got hundreds of different eyes and noses and ears and stuff, you end up with millions of different possibilities from all of those combinatrix. So it's more or less how it works. And over years, I've just been adding loads more every now and again, so it bulks that system up repeatedly.
Do you use like a tool for the ASCII art? Is there like, I don't know, there's like pixel art tools? Are there like ASCII art tools, or is it something you just use a text editor for?
Yeah, just Notepad.
Notepad, classic, yeah.
Classic.
Awesome, yeah.
It works.
Do you is Notepad your entire IDE?
Oh no, I use a thing called CodeBlocks.
Oh, okay.
But sometimes I use Notepad just for quickly sketching ideas and quickly copy and pasting, making some iterations, having an idea of what sort of stuff I can do.
Well, Huw, you already shared a lot of great information. I just want to have like a quick wrap up. Like, what did you kind of learn through this process of making this game? What are some of the things that you think went really well, and maybe some of the things that you wish you would have known before you started?
Well, I think probably if I'd known I was going to spend 4 or 5 years working on a game that was commercial, I probably wouldn't have made a text-based one. I probably would have gone for something that could have been more widely appealing for the same effort. But no regrets, man. I'm going to see it through. And I think what's gone right is definitely the community management. I think I've realized how important it is. And, you've really got to have a positive sort of PR role, I suppose, with people, and just try and be as friendly as possible and take on board the ideas, man. I've realized that, like, no one likes to admit that their game is terrible, right? Or like that maybe some parts of it are bad. And I've heard some criticism before, where I've been like, oh, it hurts to hear it sometimes. But it's never usually wrong. Do you know what I mean? Like, most of the people who are saying that, they tried to play your game and then they came to a point where there was something they didn't like. And they're a player. They're a valid player. Obviously, you can't make something for everyone. But there's a lot to be taken from comments. Like, if you get lots of comments on your game, that's a really, really valuable tool, because you're getting live customer feedback, or things you can use to mold it into something that's way better. And I think if I'd not listened to any of the comments, my game I wouldn't enjoy my game even. It probably wouldn't be anything like it is now. And I can't imagine years ago expecting it to get where it is now, but it's been almost entirely due to taking on board all the feedback and ideas people have given me. And yeah, honestly, I think that's probably the best approach. And that's something I want to take to any future projects, to be really listening to feedback, because people got good ideas, man. People are creative.
For sure. I think it's interesting that you said that you wouldn't make an ASCII game again. What makes you think that? Because I feel like one of the great things about your type of game, which seems to be also one of the reasons I think that you are able to iterate so quickly and get community feedback in there, is like, it seems like you're not really like a artist, you're more of a programmer. So
right.
Isn't ASCII kind of the perfect art style, I guess, for your kind of skill set?
Sure.
Or?
I mean, I obviously I can't put any art in there because it's just a literally a command prompt window. But I think
right, yeah,
you're absolutely spot on in that it's really easy to like quickly edit and change and fix things up. Like, it's a super easy thing to work in with like ASCII text-based sort of stuff. You can add whole new branches of the game in a relatively short period of time. So it's allowed me to over a long period of time develop so much. And I think working in a non-text-based environment, it would definitely take longer to add these things. Do you know what I mean? You'd have to come up with graphics and all sorts of stuff, and it would definitely take longer. So that's something that is totally a benefit. But I still think like that I would like to have a better chance. You know what I mean? Like, so it's been really hard to get to where I am now, where the game is making, a living. But I think if I was able to make a game that had the same appeal but was graphical and had like, its own interfaces and stuff and was way more appealing, I'm certain that I'd be doing way better. So just from that standpoint, I'd like to make something that would be easier to appeal to more people. But I absolutely don't regret having done what I've done so far. Not at all.
Yeah, definitely. I think you've done a really good job, and congrats on finding that niche, that surprising niche, I guess.
Yeah,
Of
definitely.
people who really love your text-based game, and it's really awesome. So thank you so much for sharing all of those insights, and I hope you succeed and have a good release, I guess.
Yeah, thank you so much, man. Much appreciated. Thank you for letting me talk your ear off for half an hour.
No problem.
Thanks for listening to this show. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please consider leaving a review and subscribing on whatever platform you're listening to. For more game development content, head down to moonlightgamedevs.com. I hope you have a great week, and join me for the next episode.
Oh, holy there's a massive spider on my wall. It's just like
No.
my laptop. 1 second. Are we cool to start again?
Yeah, man, definitely.
1 second, let me just capture this gigantic monster. I'm gonna have to pretend like we don't know each other and we didn't just introduce the podcast.
Hey Huw, welcome to the show.
Sorry, I thought you were gonna like restart the recording. Take 3.
You can get my composure gone.
Yeah, same.
Okay.
When you're ready, bro. We can do this.
Hey Huw, welcome.
We
We
sorry.
failed.